In 1969, a lion named Christian was raised by two young men in London, then released back into the wild in Kenya. A year later, they returned to find him. Everyone warned them not to. A full-grown lion does not remember a human face, except he did. He ran toward them, stood on his hind legs, and wrapped his paws around the men who once fed him from a bottle. Cameras were rolling. The footage still circles the internet today, more than 50 years later, and it still stops people mid-scroll. But what you are about to discover is far stranger and far more personal, because the question isn't whether one lion remembered two men. The question is whether the same wiring is sitting quietly inside every animal you've ever helped. You've probably done it yourself. A stray cat you fed once, a bird you freed from a fence, a dog you carried out of the rain, and somewhere in the back of your mind, you've wondered, did it know? Did it understand what you did? Or did it simply move on the way animals are supposed to move on? Science has been circling this question for decades, and the answer is not what most people expect. Start with the brain. Recognition memory, the kind that lets you spot a familiar face in a crowd, isn't unique to humans. It lives in a structure called the hippocampus, and almost every vertebrate has one. Cats have it. Dogs have it. Elephants have an especially large one. This part of the brain doesn't just store facts. It stores emotionally tagged experiences, moments linked to comfort, safety, or fear. So when an animal encounters you again, it isn't running a facial recognition scan the way a phone does. It's asking a much older, much simpler question. Did this creature make me feel safe, or did it make me feel afraid? That distinction changes everything. Think about how differently that reframes every quiet interaction you've ever had with an animal. You weren't just being kind in the moment. You were leaving a signature, a scent paired with calm, a voice paired with relief, a pair of hands paired with the absence of danger. None of that requires the animal to understand what rescue means, or to think about you the way another person might. It only requires one thing, a nervous system built to remember what kept it safe. In 1999, researchers studying African elephants documented something remarkable. An elephant named Jenny had been separated from another elephant, Shirley, at a young age. 22 years passed. No shared enclosure, no contact in between. When they were finally reunited at a sanctuary in Tennessee, they didn't simply notice each other. They rushed toward one another, rumbling, entwining trunks, refusing to be more than a few feet apart for days afterward. Caretakers who witnessed it said they had never seen a reunion so immediate, so certain. 22 years of separate lives, and the recognition surfaced in seconds. Elephants are famous for memory. It's practically a cliché at this point. But here's what actually surprises people. Cats, the animals most often assumed to feel nothing for anyone, are not far behind when it comes to recognizing the humans who matter to them. For a long time, cats were treated as an afterthought in bonding research. Dogs got the studies. Dogs got the headlines. Cats were assumed to be indifferent, animals that merely tolerated people rather than formed any real connection with them. Then, in 2019, animal behaviorist Kristen Vitale ran a study that quietly reshaped that assumption. Cats were placed in a room and given a choice between food, toys, an interesting scent, and their own caregiver. The majority chose the person, not the food, not the toy, the person. Vitale's follow-up research went further, finding that cats orient their attention toward familiar human faces differently than unfamiliar ones, the same category of behavioral signal researchers use to measure attachment in dogs and even in human infants. But that's not even the strangest part. Cats that have been rescued, pulled out of difficult situations, fed when they were starving, sheltered when they had nowhere else to go, often display behavior researchers describe as safe-based recognition. They don't simply remember a face the way you'd remember a photograph. They remember what that face made possible: warmth after cold, food after hunger, stillness after fear. And when that same person reappears, even after weeks or months apart, many rescued cats approach with a directness they show almost no one else: a slow blink, a raised tail, a soft chirp reserved for that one person and no other. Shelter workers see this constantly. A cat that hisses at every new volunteer will sometimes walk straight toward the one person who once sat quietly outside its cage for an hour, doing nothing but waiting. If you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who's paused to wonder what an animal remembers about you. That curiosity is exactly what this channel is built around. Stick with it, because there's more of this ahead. So what is actually happening biologically in that moment of recognition? Scientists call it associative emotional memory. Unlike simple fact-based memory, this kind is built almost entirely on feeling. The animal's brain links your scent, your voice, your posture, and your presence to a specific emotional outcome, usually relief, safety, or the absence of threat. Dogs display this constantly. A shelter dog rescued from neglect will often remember, months later, the specific tone of voice that first made it feel safe, and will react to that tone from strangers as though it's a signal worth trusting. But this pattern isn't exclusive to dogs, or even to mammals in general. Horses show it clearly, often bonding permanently with the handler who worked with them through an injury. Even corvids, crows, and ravens are known to hold on to impressions of specific humans for years, based purely on how that person once made them feel, favoring the ones who were gentle and avoiding the ones who weren't. This is where the story gets a little more personal, because that same wiring exists in you. Humans form what psychologists call rescue bonds, an intensified emotional attachment to whoever helps us during a moment of real vulnerability. It's why people often feel a lifelong connection to a nurse from a hospital stay, a stranger who stopped to help during an emergency, or a teacher who showed up at exactly the right moment. The brain doesn't just log the help as an event. It tags the person who provided it as fundamentally safe. Once tagged, that association rarely fades, even decades later, even if you never see that person again. And this is where it gets harder to look away. There's a version of this you may have seen without realizing what it actually was. A returning service member reunites with a family dog after months away. And the dog doesn't just wag its tail. It loses all composure, spinning, whining, pressing its entire body against the person's legs, as if trying to disappear into them. People usually describe that moment as loyalty. Researchers describe it as something closer to relief made visible. The dog's nervous system recognized a source of safety it had been missing, and the reaction wasn't politeness, it was release. If a rescued cat can recognize, months later, the one person who fed it when it was starving, and if an elephant can recognize another elephant after 22 years apart, then the emotional architecture behind recognition isn't a human invention layered on top of instinct. It's older than us. It's shared. Evolution built this system long before it built language, long before it built cities, long before it built anything you'd call civilization. It built one simple rule and kept it almost unchanged across millions of years. Remember whoever kept you alive and treat that memory as sacred. But this is where it gets harder to look away in a second sense too. Here's the counterintuitive twist most people miss. You'd expect the most dramatic recognition stories to come from the animals considered smartest: elephants, dolphins, primates. And in raw memory capacity, they do have an edge. Their brains can store and retrieve enormous amounts of information. But emotional recognition doesn't scale neatly with intelligence. A cat with a walnut-sized brain can hold on to the memory of the one person who saved it with the same intensity an elephant holds onto a companion across 2 decades. The size of the brain isn't what determines the depth of the bond. The intensity of the original moment is. Fear, hunger, and relief leave a stronger imprint than almost anything else an animal experiences, which means the hardest, most vulnerable moments of an animal's life are often the exact moments that create its strongest, most permanent attachments. Think about what that means for the animals in your own life, or the ones you've crossed paths with only once. The frightened cat that finally let you get close, the bird that stopped flinching after the 3rd day of feeding, the dog at the shelter that pressed its head into your hand and wouldn't move. You may have assumed the moment passed and was forgotten the second you walked away. For that animal, it may have been the single most defining event of its entire life, the moment its brain quietly decided you were safe and filed you away as proof that safety exists somewhere in the world. That's the modern mirror here. We tend to think of rescue as something that happens in one direction. Human helps animal. Animal moves on. Life continues. But the animal doesn't experience it that way. It experiences a before and an after. Before you, uncertainty. After you, one small, reliable proof that the world isn't only dangerous. So back to Christian the lion, standing on his hind legs in the Kenyan grass, wrapping his paws around two men he hadn't seen in a year. It wasn't a coincidence, and it wasn't some rare fluke of memory. It was the oldest emotional system in the animal kingdom, doing exactly what it evolved to do, recognizing the one who once made the world feel safe, and refusing to let that memory fade, even across distance, even across time. If a cat can hold that memory for months, and a lion can hold it across a year in the wild, and an elephant can hold it for 22 years, maybe the real question was never whether animals remember the humans who saved them. Maybe the real question is how many animals are quietly carrying a memory of you right now, somewhere out there, waiting for the moment you walk back into the frame. If you've ever had a moment like this with an animal of your own, a cat that finally trusted you, a stray that never forgot you, leave a comment and tell that story. And if this changed how you think about the animals you've helped, a like goes a long way toward getting this in front of someone who needs to feel it too.